Good morning. I'm Matthew Laspina from the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Welcome to Malta. Okay, welcome to the 4th World Small-Scale Fisheries Congress. I hope you have all settled in your hotels and you've had safe flights. Basically, what's going to happen is we're going to have two speeches from the Parliamentary Secretary and from the Director General of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and then we will also have Ratana, who will also explain the way the Congress is going to be divided. So first I would like to invite Honorevoli Alicia Bugeya-Sajt to come and provide us with her speech. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, lil kulħadd. Unfortunately, Ratana is not with us here today. However, she will be with us online, so I would like to say hi to her. She's joining online, and would like to thank her for choosing Malta as the destination for the 4th World Congress. So, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, welcome. What an honor it is for me to welcome you all to Malta, where together we will be imagining the unimaginable. I thank the team, Too Big to Ignore, for having nominated Malta for this important event. I may be biased, of course, but I believe they may have an excellent choice by choosing our island. This Congress and the team who have chosen for it could not have come at a more appropriate time. We all know the challenges our sector is facing. We live and work with them every single day. Yet we are all here today because we are driven by the knowledge that our shared passion for small-scale fisheries can revitalize the sector and can indeed turn challenges into opportunities. That is why imagining the unimaginable is crucial. If we are to make sure that small-scale fishing remains viable, sustainable, and attractive for new generations, we truly have to think creatively. In the coming days, we will be dissecting and debating the issues of our times in a series of panels. Allow me to thank our chairs and speakers, and of course all of you, for the insightful contributions I am sure you will be making. From blue justice to gender equity, good subsidies to low-impact fishing, good governance, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for our sector. We have a very diverse and exciting agenda ahead of us. Our main topics also align with the United Nations aims this year, which is to promote collaboration between fishers, researchers, managers, and stakeholders who are directly or indirectly involved in the fishing sector. So this International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture is the perfect opportunity to recognize and promote the importance of small-scale fisheries on international level. I am also pleased to note that we have a diverse group attending this week's Congress, which includes local and international fishers, civil society organization, as well as academics. I am convinced that this diversity will bring about the best possible solutions and best way forward. In my relatively new role as Parliamentary Secretary for Fisheries, I have made it a mission to strengthen the already positive relationship between fishers, fisheries managers, and researchers. I believe that this is crucial to achieve a sustainable fishing industry, particularly one that is so small in scale. In parallel, I have also strived to regularize and reintroduce traditional fishing methods, such as the mregba, a fishing method our local fishers have been using for centuries. I believe that such initiatives can boost and preserve our fishing legacy, which dates back to hundreds of years. It is this legacy which has been passed from one generation to the next that we must protect and help adapt to our modern times. Of course, much remains to be done. We must recognize that small-scale fishing is, in reality, far from small. While it may not have a massive economic impact, it plays a significant social and cultural role in our communities. As an academic, but even so more as a woman hailing from families of fishers, I speak from experience when I say that small-scale fishing in Malta is an integral part of its social fabric and an emblematic representation of our culture as a Mediterranean island. On this note, I look forward to hearing from our local fishers during this Congress, who will have the opportunity to share with us their principal concerns, as well as their traditional ecological knowledge, which they have honed for over the years. Small-scale fishing has seen several changes over the past decades, and it seems that some fishers have managed to persist through it. However, it is vital to recognize that these changes, which have ranged from new supranational processes to fleet regulations and top-down methods, have not all been positive. This is where we, politicians, academics, and activists, must come in. It falls on us to make sure that small-scale fishers are not abandoned in the wake of globalization and modernization by strategically supporting rather than neglecting this industry. I believe in incentivizing human capital, particularly young fishers. I believe in ensuring that fishers have a seat at the policy-making table. I believe in shining a spotlight on the importance of small-scale fisheries and acknowledging its socio-economic richness. This is why seeing you all here, as enthusiastic and energetic as I am, gives me hope for the future of small-scale fisheries. I am convinced that our collective efforts can bring about a robust and sustainable future for this sector, and together we can rejuvenate it. On this note, let me please conclude by encouraging you all to keep up your efforts towards small-scale fisheries, towards the fishers, their families, and each and every individual who benefits from this sector in a multitude of ways. I thank you for all your attention and wish you a fruitful Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Bugeja Sait. Now I would like to invite the Director General of the Department of Fisheries, Mr. Bjorn Carlos.
Good morning, everyone. I was about to present myself, but Matthew just did that for me. So, yes, I am the Director General, country serving for the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, Bjorn Carlos. And first of all, I would really like to thank you all for taking your time to travel and also to join us online and to attend for this prestigious Congress to celebrate a sector that is deeply rooted in the Mediterranean communities and traditions. It is an honor for us that Malta has been chosen to host one out of 5 of the 4 World Small-Scale Fisheries Congresses that have been organized this year around the globe as a celebration for the International Year for Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. We are here today to celebrate small-scale fisheries, a sector which is unfortunately diminishing due to the constant hardships and challenges it is facing. The small-scale fisheries sector faces several hardships, such as the main issue of overfishing due to IUU catches, the constant competition in the local markets due to importation of food, the declining number of artisanal fishers, and other stresses and pressures which continue to affect the same artisanal fishermen. All these can ultimately result in the loss of a valuable tradition. Looking locally, the Maltese fishing villages not only provide us with their freshly daily catches with less food miles possible, but also provide the Maltese population and tourists with the ability to appreciate the colorful boats in our harbors. It would be a great shame that due to these issues and stresses, future generations may not have the opportunity to work in such a sector and to recognize the full world of small-scale fisheries. And here I'm alluding not only to the fresh catches, etc., but also to the visual that we have in our picturesque harbors, where, as you will have for sure already had the opportunity, you can see as already mentioned, the traditional boats with the traditional colors, which are slowly but surely diminishing. At this Congress, I am satisfied to say that several local and foreign researchers have registered to present their research projects and valuable work that they are carrying out for small-scale fishers on a regional level. The Congress will build on knowledge and experience on the factors and conditions already available to ensure the viability and the lasting of the sector. Options to tackle these issues will be discussed throughout the Congress through the numerous presentations available under the theme Imagine the Unimaginable, which will provide us with the flexibility to discuss goals and objectives that are difficult to reach. However, if reached, they will ensure a fruitful future for our small-scale fishers. This Congress will provide us with an opportunity to improve the governance in the sector and to ensure the fishers involved are at the center of the same management of the fishery. Through the discussions we'll have throughout the Congress, we will ensure that a more holistic approach to fisheries management is taken to ensure the sustainability and viability of the sector is safeguarded. My department aims to fulfill its role in the gathering and the analyzation of the data gathered and the monitoring of the fish stocks. However, our ultimate aim is to provide the local fishers with a service to strengthen and educate the sector for their own benefit. As a department, we highly believe in involving and informing the fishers in general in the management aspect of the sector through consultations and meetings. And we highly value their input as they are the main stakeholders that may be directly impacted by new management measures. The department is also responsible, of course, for the fishery. So we attempt to ensure that the key principle of the ecosystem-based approach are acknowledged to ensure the sustainability of the sector as a whole. As our parliamentary secretary, the Honorable Dr. Alicia Bujaya mentioned, fishers sacrifice their time from their family. Hence, we should also give support to their families, as well as female fishers who also worked hard to ensure that their sector is a thriving one. And this is a particular point where I think we need to strive as well for gender balancing also in our sector. Through the combination of the knowledge every participant holds, be it academic or traditional, we can create a new plan of action to ensure that the future of small-scale fisheries is a rewarding and productive one. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the officials and officers of my department who worked hard in this organization, also the Events and Promotion Unit of our ministry, the Office of the Secretariat, and too big to ignore. Without them, without whom this Congress would not have come to fruition. I would also like to thank the small-scale fishers for their perseverance and the interest they take in their work, and I encourage them to keep passing their traditional ecological knowledge to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General. Now I would like to give the floor to Ratana, who will be joining us through Zoom. She will give us a couple of introductory words, and she will also show us a couple of slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew. You can imagine how disappointed I am not being there in person after all the effort that we have put, and really to just be there to thank. I'm now going to have to try to say the official name of our chair of the session of the Congress, Honorable Dr. Boyaya Said. Of course, we know her as Alicia, and Matthew, and the Director General and other teams. So thank you so much for hosting this. And I wish I could see you, but basically the only thing I can see is the podium at the moment. So now I get to experience what our virtual participants are seeing. So this is getting good. Now we really learn how the hybrid works. And of course, because it's hybrid, right, we are able to do this, so which is wonderful. If the camera person can easy stream, if you can help somehow pan the camera so that we can see a little bit of the people in the room, that would be great. But if it doesn't work, don't worry so much about it. We'll just know that you're there. And I hope that since nobody's interrupting me, I'm assuming that people can actually see me and hear me well. So thank you again for being there and everywhere to participate in this wonderful Congress, and apologize again for not being there in person. I'll put my presentation just so that you see what we have been doing for this Congress, right? So basically, as has already been mentioned, this is the third in the series. So we started in Japan in May. We then just hosted one here in St. John's. This is where I'm sitting, by the way. And now we are in Malta, and then we have 2 more congresses to go. Oh, this is perfect. Now we can see the room. Great to see everyone. I really know what I'm missing, right? When I now see it, maybe I should not have looked. Anyway, so there's going to be 2 more congresses in Merida next month, and then the final one will be in Cape Town. So you see the way we organize these is always, as we do things in Too Big to Ignore, very poetic, with lots of wonderful themes. We're going from building forward better to getting it right. Now we're in Malta talking about imagine the unimaginable. We would go to Merida to talk about what we need to do to become stronger together. And then we'll end up in Cape Town thinking about leading by examples. So because we have these 5 series, we actually are now doing what we call passing the torch. So we have been inviting the host of each Congress to come to the next one to say a few words about the previous Congress. So we are very happy to have Evan Andrew.
Well, that's a shorter introduction than I had hoped for. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Oh my goodness. Okay, we're gonna imagine together. We have to get some energy. Good morning, how are you? Good, good. My name is Evan J. Andrews. I am a senior research fellow in Too Big to Ignore, and I'm based at Memorial University in Newfoundland, Canada. So I had the honor of serving as co-chair for the North American Congress, along with Dr. Paul Foley and under the leadership of Dr. Ratana Chimpagdi. It is truly a privilege for me to be here to pass the torch, so to speak. It's not a torch, it's not even a picture of a torch, but anyways, you get the idea. And to tell you more about what happened in St. John's. So from June 20th to 22nd, over 200 people participated in the North American Congress, with more than half joining in person in St. John's. Congress attendees were from Indigenous nations and coastal communities, fishing-related industry, NGOs, federal and provincial government, and of course from the natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities, and everything in between. So the Congress was closely tied with the Ocean Frontier Institute Module I, Informing Governance Responses in a Changing Ocean, including its 3rd phase of research, Getting It Right. The Congress facilitated dialogue about and across different dimensions of change and transition, and that's what we envisioned as many ITs needed to achieve and maintain sustainable fisheries, coastal communities, and ocean activities. So inspired by this multidimensional perspective, Congress activities were organized around 7 themes: getting adaptation right, getting small right, getting conservation right, governance, aquaculture, the blue economy, and the future. And the Congress closed with a final session on getting everything right. Can you imagine how bold we were? And it's during this session that attendees developed this new goal of moving together to get everything right, which sums up discussion about and the vision for small-scale fisheries in North America. So along with this new goal is the need for, we imagine, as everything frameworks. And this is proposed as a way for us to come together and integrate knowledge of social and ecological change for fisheries and ocean sustainability. Small-scale fisheries do not occur in isolation. They are embedded in broad sociological changes and human activities that influence sustainability in coastal communities as well, and also in broader society. So while it's not really clear yet what this means at this time, the everything framework or frameworks speaks to the need for holistic ways to characterize and address interactions and changes that influence small-scale fisheries. We did have a lot of fun in St. John's, sharing information, exchanging knowledge, and deliberating important issues related to small-scale fisheries in North America. We even watched films together and certainly had some fish and a few drinks too. So I have no doubt this will be the case here too, which is had a good start already with that big, awesome fish fest yesterday. So what a wonderful event. Similar to Europe, small-scale fisheries in North America have mostly been ignored. The World Small-Scale Fisheries Congress regional series are changing that. We are saying to the world that the year 2022, Artisanal Year of Fisheries and Aquaculture, is not only about small-scale fisheries in the South, but also in the North. So I look forward to learning more about small-scale fisheries in Europe. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I wish you all a positive, hopeful, and successful Congress as you imagine the unimaginable in revitalizing small-scale fisheries in Europe. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass the torch to you. Come on, let me pass the torch. You're welcome.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We will edit this to our collection of torches that we've collected so far. No, I'm joking. This is the first one. So thank you very much, Evan. I'm really happy to receive this, having had an experience in Newfoundland myself, where TBTI started. And I really hope that this Congress will not be the last in Malta. Our fisheries in Malta compose 97% of the fleet, the small-scale fisheries. So I'm hoping that from this Congress, we will get to share our challenges and seek opportunities that are already being implemented in other countries. Thank you so much for choosing Malta again, and let's start with this beautiful Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Alicia. And this is another thing about the hybrid Congress, of course. Chances there will be connection problem, etc. So I think we're getting used to this, so this should be okay. I don't think it's a lot of fun for me to be speaking from here and knowing that the time is almost, it is almost time to get started. But I just need to just say a few words, and I'm hoping that. And now I don't even know that my PowerPoint would work, but okay. Well, basically, without trying to risk these too much, let me just give it a try. Now, if everything else fails, nothing works, you can definitely get things started without worrying about me. But let me just try to see if I could share my screen, because Last time we had a Congress here in St. John's, it turned out that I didn't really talk about the Congress so much, especially about TBTI. So I thought I'll just spend a few minutes to let you know. Many of you already know us, of course. So this is great. But basically, this is a research, global research network. And we have been, many of you are part of this. And we have been working together for quite 10 years, actually. This is the 10th anniversary of TBTI, in addition to being the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. With the 5 congresses, we have a lot to celebrate. We have done quite a lot, as you can imagine. A lot of research that we have been doing, the case studies. We have published many books and also various publications, including ebook. We also have been building information system, trying to enhance knowledge about small-scale fisheries. This is our crowdsourced platform, which is part of that, trying to enhance knowledge and information about small-scale fisheries. We also are working very hard on building capacity, and this is a concept that we have been promoting, the transdisciplinarity. So many of you have been part of this as well. So we will continue to work on trying to do our best in building not only research capacity, but also governance capacity, as well as committee capacity in order to achieve sustainability of small-scale fisheries. And of course, we've been doing a lot of engagement and knowledge mobilization through our communication strategies and network building. So having a Congress like the one we have now in Malta is definitely part of that. But there's a lot of things we do online, which you have been, many of you have participated, many events that we hosted at the seminar. So all of that is to say that, there's a lot to do and there's a lot more to be done, even if we think we have done a lot already, but there's many challenges that remain for small-scale fisheries. And the Congress is an opportunity for that. So it's always an open forum. So it was not planned to be just scientists talking, but it is supposed to be a space where we interact and we talk about important issues and we plan for the future. So the theme for this one, as you know, it's about imagining the unimaginable, but basically it's really about revitalizing small-scale fisheries in Europe. So the plan for the next 3 days, you already have started the big fish fest last night at Marshall Lock, and I don't know that this is what you saw yesterday. This was what I saw when I was there during that trip that Alicia hosted us for the culinary festival. But I'm sure it went very well. Evan sent me these pictures, and again, I truly missed it. But the final picture with Matthew going like this, that means it must be good. So congratulations on getting the Fish Fest going. And I think that has inspired many of us to trying to do the same in other locations, which is great. Okay, 3 days of the Congress. We are in the opening plenary, which we will soon stop. But then we will spend a lot of time in the plenary room. Every plenary session is 2 hours. So speakers are planned to speak and engage. And then we have a good chairs and moderator to try to do that. I will be around and we'll engage with the audience virtually as well. So we would invite everyone to participate. Then we have concurrent sessions. There will be 4 breakout rooms. By now, you might already find them. They are just across the hall, I understand it. So we're going to be doing this for 3 days, right? Plenary, concurrent, plenary, concurrence. On the very last day, we would have the final plenary, and then we close the Congress, right? Tonight, you're going to have a Congress reception, and then you would have free time and the evening on other days to enjoy what Malta has to offer. It's very important to keep in mind, right? This is a very active, very interactive Congress. Things are changing quickly, so do take a look at your Congress program, both on the website and also on the Zoom platform for update. We are trying for all sessions to start and stop on time. If you're organizing a concurrent session, you might want to assign someone to help host as a co-host of the host Zoom, so that way you can engage with the online participants. In-person speakers, we have PowerPoint presentations, and you haven't sent that. We're just looking for your slides, not the recording of your presentation. You should bring that or send that by email, right? To as soon as you can, actually, so that we can line it up on the correct laptop for you. You will not be able to present from your own computer. So do not try to plug in your laptop, right? Because the system has to be set up for the hybrid. In-person participants, when you wanted to ask questions, please speak to the microphone, so that way the virtual people would hear. Virtual participants, you can use the chat or the Q&A to post your comments and questions. Now, remember that it's a hybrid, so which means that in principle, it should work, but there would likely be things that might not work. So I am asking everyone to be kind and supportive and understanding, and enjoy the fact that we really can do this without charging a fortune, and not only once, twice, but we can do it 5 times. So let's enjoy that. Okay, so now it's just a thank you, right? We would like to make sure that everyone who's been part of this are really, really acknowledged. The International Organizing Committee and the local committee and all the coordination, logistic, and support, you have been great and wonderful. So I know that many of the organizing committee members are in the room. Can we then please get them to stand up and give them a big round of applause? I don't know why I don't hear the applause from your end. Maybe you can let me hear the sound from the room, even though, yes. Okay, we have a little gifts for you. I don't know that the gifts are around. Evan and Vesna for the organizing committee. Can you stand? I don't see anyone standing up, actually. Are they hiding somewhere? Anyway, okay, I'm assuming that that's almost done. Okay, just a little gift from Newfoundland. This is another things that we like to see. Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, so if you must know by now that Vesna is somewhere there. Vesna, can you stand up? Excellent. Okay. And of course, we have Matthew, who's been doing everything possible, and his team, Martina, Gabriela, Matese, Paula, Thomas, some of them are probably out in the lobby trying to help us. Okay, thank you, everyone. And of course, Evan and our team in St. John's for Nova. And thanks to MCAST for hosting the venue, and Easy Stream for doing this audio video, and other tech companies. Then we have our partner organizations, of course, the Government of Malta, the Fisheries Department, and IID and Oak Foundation. This event is part of the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So thank you, FAO, for the great job you're doing to help to celebrate this the small-scale fisheries of the world. Okay, that's all we have to do for now. We're going to take about 3 minutes pause in order to go get ready for the plenary 1. So I'll be back in about 2 minutes now. So plenary speakers and chairs, get ready, please. We will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
You don't need
Do I need to wait for, can we start?
Just a second here.
Okay, 2 minutes are gone, or 3, I think Ratana said. We are all waiting here to start our Congress. So my name is Milena Aria Schreiber. I am a marine social scientist from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, but also I have a temporary work at the University of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And this is my co-chair, Katia Frangodes. I don't think she needs introduction. We all know Katia. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I am from the University of Brest in France, and I am social scientist working on fisheries since many years.
Thank you, Katia. Okay, just a brief introduction on this plenary on blue justice. And then we start with our presentations that we have today. Here. So, imagine blue justice. The first question could be, why imagine? Imagine might sound like a trivial human activity. You are imagining things, you are dreaming, you are just not working, something that you do when you are relaxing on the beach, you start imagining. But already in 2010, Svein Gentov published a paper saying, imagining fisheries not as communities, but merely as revenue-generating systems has led to the marginalization of small-scale fisheries worldwide. There's already the word imagining there. Then in 2018 comes the paper from Berkes and Pratip Nayak, who is sitting here somewhere. A paper called The Role of Communities in Fisheries Management. One would first need to imagine it. There's Pratip. That's your paper. And they follow this argument from Svein and said that if only policymakers and managers could imagine healthy fishing communities taking care of resources, then you could have viable small-scale fisheries, and the trajectories of small-scale fisheries could be very different. So we can ask ourselves, are policymakers in big deficit of imagination? But I want to talk more about imagining and images, because our first speaker in this session of Imagine and Blue Justice will expand on that topic. And then the second question is, of course, why blue justice? And blue justice is the idea that we need to withstand blue growth and blue economy strategies by focusing on the centrality of small-scale fisheries for sustainable ocean development and social justice. So as you see in the slide, for example, the EU Blue Economy report doesn't have activities on the ocean like wind or farming, blue food production using blue technology, high technology, shipping, coastal tourism, but fisheries wasn't even there at the beginning. So blue justice is the idea that small-scale fisheries should play a central role for this ocean development, not only on the economic side, but also as a future, that there is a future for coastal fisheries, and it's central for the development of the oceans. So the blue justice concept is a new concept relatively. It was coined at the Third World Small-Scale Fisheries Congress in Thailand in 2018. But since then, it has achieved many things, mostly because of the efforts of the Too Big to Ignore global network. So it started like a social commitment, an idea where we should commit. Then in 2020, the Wikipedia page was launched already 2 years after. Then it comes the electronic book, the global scan, that collects the case studies of blue injustices all around the world. It's already in its third edition, and it has more than 30 cases of blue injustices, and it's edited by Vesna Geresi, and who was just introduced, and Ratana Shenpakdi. Parallel to this also came a bit later the glossary, which is a glossary, a list of concepts that should be used to address epistemic blue injustice, we call it. That is the lack of concepts to interpret what is happening with small-scale fisheries worldwide. And then finally, there are in between also many papers published by most of us. But then finally, this impressive book here on blue justice, and I think this is just in 4 years, less than 4 years, all the things that has been happening, with 35 chapters and explains clearly the topic. So it's not just started with the social movement, but then with the Wikipedia, then collecting data, and finally a research book where more than 60 collaborators writing around the world about blue justice. And with this brief introduction, I will start to present our speakers for this plenary session. We will have first Professor Emeritus Svein Jentoft from the Arctic University of Norway, with a presentation called The Windmills of Your Mind, Governing Small-Scale Fisheries from Images. Then we have Brian O'Riordan from the platform Low Impact Fisheries in Europe. Brian will present a presentation with the title Blue Fear, European Small-Scale Fisheries and the Blue Economy, What Hope for Blue Justice. Then we have 2 case studies of France. One will be presented by Brice Troulet, from the, thank you, from the Professor University of Nantes. I don't speak any French, you already noticed. His presentation is called The Wind That Shakes the Fishers, Information and Participation in Marine Planning, the French case. And last but not least, I'm very happy to have Arne Kins here with his presentation on reclaiming blue space, can producer organizations and innovative financing schemes transform artisanal fisheries. Perspectives from France. And with this, I would like to invite Svein and start with our first presentation of this plenary. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, if the other presenters could also come and sit here, maybe it's easier, if you don't mind. So we need, yeah, Brian, Brice, and Arne. Svein, you can present from here. You decide, Svein.
But how do I control the...
Here. It's just the green.
The green one?
Yeah, and you see your presentation. It's very easy.
You have a slide.
Oh, yeah. Can I take this away?
I don't know what is this.
Yeah, it's this.
Okay. Is that it?
Sorry? Can I start? Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I always wanted to go to Malta, and I had imagined that I would one day go there, and here I am. It's fantastic. I must also say it's wonderful to speak in front of a live audience for a change. I haven't done that in 2.5 years. So this is quite special for me. I've done it multiple times on Zoom, but it's not the same thing. You may find that what I have to say is a bit high-flying, abstract, and perhaps philosophical at times. But it is difficult to avoid that when talking about imaging and images. You should not, please bear with me, but you should, when you listen to me, think of small-scale fisheries, because that is what I have thought about when I prepared this talk. I will speak to the general issue of imaging the unimaginable, which is the topic of this conference. It is a topic that is not new. People have been discussing this issue on a general level for ages. How does images frame our thoughts about how the world works? How do images frame what we do in this world? And how do they frame how we govern things, including small-scale fisheries? Let me start with this guy. So nothing happens. The green one. I'm pressing the green one. There it is.
I can move for you.
Okay. David Hume, 1711 to 1766, said that men are mightily governed by the imagination. I assume that applies to women as well. Hume here engaged in a long tradition of thought, beginning with Plato and his mentor Socrates, who considered imagination as the weaker form of knowledge, in contrast to knowledge built by rational thinking and empirical investigation. Images are the things that we can see for our inner eyes. They are the windmills of our mind, as Noel Harrison wrote about in his song text. You may have heard Sting sing that beautiful song. Images may be ambiguous, erratic, and certainly biased, but nevertheless indispensable for building knowledge. If we want to build a different future for small-scale fisheries, one in which small-scale fisheries thrives, we first have to imagine it. So images are how the knowledge-building process starts. It's inevitable to building knowledge. Hypotheses draw from hypothesis from images. Hypotheses generate research questions, which by means of systematic research methodology may prove an answer that leaves a clearer, more nuanced, and perhaps entirely different image than the one you started out with. Images are thus storages of knowledge, still a weak form, as these old guys said, but knowledge nevertheless. But as Aristotle warned, as images motivate and guide action, they can also lead us astray. Images are not necessarily true representation of what they picture. Imagination may be false, Aristotle said. People are not always seeing seeing what they think or believe they see. They do not necessarily see what they have as an image in their minds. In Plato's allegory of the cave, people take for real the shadows they see on the wall. They are the only thing that they know because they are the only thing they are allowed to see. In his famous paper on the tragedy of the commons, Garrett Hardin asked us, asked us to picture a pasture open to all, where each herdsman will try to keep as many cattle as possible. I've underlined picture there because it's another word for imagining. It's not hard to draw such a picture in our mind. Then Hardin leads us to believe that the outcome is given. The inherent logic of the commons remorselessly generates tragedy. This is also why he alludes to the ancient Greek theatrical plot. This is how a tragedy evolves and ends. The tragedy here is a metaphor for a situation which is not hard to imagine in real life, like in fisheries. Hardin's allegory has therefore assumed a central role in the way we think about the fisherman's problem. As in this book by McAvoy from 1986. Images like Hardin's tragedy have institutional implications. The pasture cannot take all the grazing pressure. Thus, there is a need for restrictions on access and resource use. Because freedom in a commons brings ruin to all, which is one of his most famous statements. Therefore, the situation calls for limitations of the freedom of the commoners, which in a tragedy must come from the outside. In the theater of the tragedy, it happens when a figure is literally lowered down onto the stage and who solves the problem for them. This is the Deus ex machina, which means the God in machinery, which is in Hardin's allegory, the state. Okay? Hardin makes an analytical point here. The tragedy of the commons is abstract reasoning. He asks us to imagine individual users, like fishers, in an unregulated resource commons acting on their own individual economic calculus. Then he makes us having to conclude that the tragedy is inescapable and foreseeable. It is, in a sense, a mathematical statement, like 2 + 2 is 4, which is and will always and was always true, with the power, our logic, derived from first principles. It cannot be falsified by empirical evidence. It is to be considered like Plato's allegory of the cave. We learn something as when we understand that 2 + 2 is 4. In Plato's case, we learn the value of 1, freedom, and 2, learning equals enlightenment. When the cavemen are set free, they learn that there is a different light out there, a light from the sun rather than from the fire behind them. This is also what Otto Brox, my old professor, argues regarding Hardin's tragedy of the commons in a paper he published in Human Organization some years ago, in 1990. Using fisheries as an example, he considered Hardin's allegory not as a statement about how things are in the real world, but as an analytical device. And I quote him, a part of the language we use in describing and explaining the world. It enables us to see what would otherwise be ignored, which is what language does. Allows us to see things. Hardin's allegory of the tragedy of the commons demonstrates the possibility that it is indeed within our reach to exhaust fish stocks, not as a deliberate outcome, but as an unintended aggregate consequence of unrestricted individuals seeking to maximize their own utility. His allegory is foreshadowing something that might well happen. Jan Koyman's book about governance has inspired much of the work that we in TBDI have done on small-scale fisheries governance. In his theory, images plays a role. He argues that governance always commences from an image of how the world works. Governance is inconceivable without the formation of images. Anyone involved in governing in whatever capacity or authority forms images about what he or she is governing. The images people have in mind frame their actions also in a fisheries governance context. Hardin's image legitimizes state intervention as a deus ex machina, as a god in the machinery, emerging on the stage to fix the problem that the actors are not capable of solving themselves. The images provides an answer to a problem that it defines itself. However, as Aristotle said, an image may lead us astray. In the real world, a resource crisis may have other reasons than those Hardin talks about. When he asks us to picture may just be the shadows on the cave wall or the windmills of our minds. Hardin has created a lot of epistemological panic, as Gregory Bateson called it, among social scientists who have felt the urge to check out how good a fit his allegory is to reality. Does the picture leave out relevant nuances? Should we not consider what is outside the picture frame? What if fishers are less self-centered and more community-oriented? Is it realistic to assume that a commons that is not regulated by the state is not regulated at all, so that perhaps there is no need for a god in the machinery? There are other classical theoretical plots or archetypes that we could draw from. Well, there is a tragedy, but what if the image of the commons is portrayed as a romance or a comedy rather than a tragedy? Or what if we image the commons as a satire? Shakespeare wrote in all the four genres. Social justice is an issue absent in the tragedy. And the only thing Hardin has to say about it is that injustice, and I quote him, injustice is preferable to total ruin. The struggle for justice, however, has a more prominent role to play in the romance plot. Shifting images would involve different assumptions and hypotheses. Contrary to the tragedy, the comedy and the romance have happy outcomes. We would also benefit from the satire's critical perspective, pausing to reflect on the biases inherent in our images. How things can be different than they are is never a waste of time, because mistakes tend to be expensive, and because path dependency are often impossible to correct. Thinking outside the box is difficult but worthwhile, and not just as an afterthought. In Koiman's lingo, the tragedy of the commons is an ingo of the system to be governed. In our case, a fishery. But what image does he offer for the governing system? Koiman argues that a society now has reached a level of complexity where government is not capable of governing single-handedly. It relies on the contribution of the market, the civil society, the academia, and the media. Thus, picturing the governance system as a pyramid to the left there, with government at the summit and stakeholders at the receiving end of a chain of command, leaves a false image of how societies are actually governed, he argues. The pyramid image pictures an unmovable and impenetrable governance system, a closed system, if you want. Koiman's image is that of a more open system, like that of the rose, which with multiple and interacting stakeholders as the petals, who are negotiating among themselves on how to define and solve problems in a governance context. Fisheries co-management is a better frame within the image of the rose than the pyramid, and in the image of the comedy rather than the tragedy. In the pyramid, power sits at the summit. In the rose image, power is shared and therefore more difficult to locate, which is not unproblematic. Here, Robert Dahl's question in his seminal study from 1961, who governs, would be relevant. In the rose image, as in Dahl's book, conflict and power plays a role. The playing field is not necessarily level. In the pyramid image, the question of who governs is less interesting. It is whoever sits at the summit. In the rose image, it is an intriguing research question. In the pyramid, small-scale fisheries stakeholders are inactive or reactive. In the rose image, they are proactive in a struggle with other stakeholders, including government. They may, as in the romance plot, be victorious in the end, as the working class in Karl Marx's narrative, but only if they have sufficient power to control the outcome. Votes count, but resources decide, the Norwegian political scientist stated or observed. Therefore, small-scale fisheries people need to unite, as Marx said about the workers of the world. In their struggle for social justice, they gain power by organizing. Power is a resource. In the coastal field, the governance system is made up by an undetermined rose petals, and they are increasing in the blue economy. Who the stakeholders are, what they have at stake, what powers do small-scale fisheries people possess relative to other stakeholders in the struggle for space and resources is an urgent question that we should ask. We need the image of the romance to ask these questions. In the blue economy, they are more relevant than ever. Gregory Bateson, who was a biologist and a social anthropologist, argued that the major problems in the world are a result of the difference between how the nature works and the way people think. They, Bateson said, often err in confusing the map with the territory. Notably, this argument was not specifically directed at geographers who are dealing in maps. The map is here a metaphor, which we see from the sentences that follows. He's making the same point about language. The name is not the thing being named. The name is just what we have agreed to call the thing, like the chair you are sitting on. You are not sitting on the name. You cannot blame the name for whatever discomfort you may be feeling. I could add, the image is not the thing that is being imaged. You may get an image of who I am after listening to me, but I am not that image. If Hardin's tragedy could be seen as a map, it is certainly not the terrain. Only a representation, some would say a distortion of the terrain. It may lead us astray. We could compare Hardin's map with Picasso's line drawing of a man. He is there, but you would look hard to see him. I would object, though, if someone said that this is a representation of me. But as Bateson would hold, that regardless of how accurate and vivid Picasso's portrait is, it is and can never be me. The image is what we have in our head and what we make up in an allegory, a name, a metaphor, a text, a map, or in a drawing, like this one. None of this should be confused with the thing that is being portrayed or described. They are not the real thing. They are just like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind, as in the song text. Images are useful in the classroom for their simplicity and pedagogical value, but they are maybe risky or even dangerous in the real world, as Elinor Ostrom noted with reference to Hardin. The risk of not just misrepresenting, but distorting the terrain is real, and in experience that small scale fisheries people have when crucial issues like inequity, injustice, and power are left out of the picture, as in Hardin's allegory. Acting on the image, map, name, metaphor, and not the thing in itself may add to the harm that small-scale fisheries people are already experiencing. Also, in a governance system where the state is imagining itself as the god in the machinery, as Deus ex machina. Bateson argues that when we realize that the map is not the terrain, and the name is not the thing that is being named, or that the image is not the thing being imaged, we experience, and I quote him, something resembling freedom. This is not the freedom Hardin is talking about, but the freedom Plato discusses. That is the freedom that comes with enlightenment, as when people trapped in the cave are allowed to see the sun outside it. It is also the freedom that comes with interacting and learning from others, as in Koymann's governance image, and the ideal co-management arrangement, where the god in the machinery is redundant. I must stop here. My time is out. Thank you for listening.
Now we have Brian.
I just knocked to you when I wanted to change. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here in Malta for this gathering and to meet some old friends and to make some new friends. There's going to be a lot of interactions over the next few days. We're going to be meeting, hugging, shaking hands, maybe some rough words on things we don't agree on. But at the end of the day, the idea is, I think we all come away from this meeting with some new framework to help us understand the world which we're all working in, which is the world of small-scale fisheries. So without more ado, if we could just get to the first page, just leave it there for the moment. So Blue Fear is all about the law that locks the man and women up for stealing the goose off the commons, but leaves the greater villain loose, who from the goose the common steals. This is the Blue Fear we're talking about small-scale fishers who can see the rules being changed. They can see discussions going on behind closed doors, in banks, in international NGOs, in the corridors of power. The blue economy is emerging. This is a coin that was termed by fishers from Africa to describe how they view the blue economy, which at the moment is something ill-defined. Who are these new players who are going to come in and carve up the oceans for their blue bonds, their power generating stations, their mineral extraction industries? Who are they? This is the blue fear, the fear of the unknown. In Europe, we also face this blue fear, partly because we're not sure what we're talking about, but also because what we talk about small-scale fisheries is quite ill-defined. In the European Commission, there is a definition: all vessels under 12 meters using non-towed gears are defined as small-scale coastal fisheries for allocating resources. We also have many other definitions. There's artisanal fisheries, which is non-industrialized, owner on board. In France and Spain, there are petit métier, or artis menoris, which is passive gear. There is small-scale fishing, petit pêche, pêche côtière, piccolo pesca. And in FAO, perhaps, where we're getting nearer the mark, is a matrix approach to look at small-scale fisheries from the point of view of a whole range of attributes and seeing how those attributes marry up to give a score at the end of the day. So the very small are very low on the scale, the very larger scale in terms of gear, power, and so on, are higher up. Next slide, please. In life, we look at various other attributes. We talk about seasonal diversity or polyvalence. The small-scale fishery is all about catch of the day, a fresh catch, a few kilos of high-quality fish that's landed in the port, on ice, going directly to the consumers. As was mentioned earlier, the small-scale fishing sector is rooted in the cultural traditions. It has a heritage value. It's an integral part of the social fabric in coastal communities. We're talking of very small enterprises. These, at the end of the day, fishing is a business. It has to make money. So we're talking of small enterprises with turnovers of a few €1,000, catches of maybe a few tons of fish. It's a nano enterprise, a micro enterprise where the value addition is crucial. Fishermen must be price makers, not price takers. Where you have mass landings of fish, it's impossible for the fisherman to negotiate a price. Supply determines demand, determines price. Small-scale fisheries in Europe, as in elsewhere, is also highly dependent on voluntary labor. There are many women, family members who are involved in keeping the enterprise afloat, whose labor goes unseen, unrecognized, unrewarded, apart from the fact that the enterprise continues. Relatively low earnings, perhaps 2 to 3 times less than in larger scale fisheries, declining profitability, and a lack of generational renewal. So I'm very pleased to see Hayden here, along with Bally from Scotland. Hayden is representing fishing youth, and also we have from Brittany, a teacher who's working with small-scale fishers to encourage fishing youth to enter the fishery. There's also some misunderstanding at European level. In 2018, Commissioner Vella talked about small-scale fisheries being the backbone of the fleet, the workers and the community. They are also the first to feel the pain of collapsing resources. It is therefore important to build the future with them. This is a totally different vision to the Director General, who made a speech at the UN Oceans, who said, in Europe, small-scale fishing is fishing from small boats and not necessarily sustainable. We need more regulation, we need more control, we need more data to ensure that they're not fishing illegally. How do you balance these two aspects? Next slide, please. So, if we look at the model of small against large, we're talking of larger scale fleet, which is 24% by vessel numbers, 45% of the workforce, but 80% of the catch, spending several days at sea, catching several tons, with turnovers of hundreds of thousands and millions of euro per year. On the other hand, the small-scale fleet, big in number, 75% of the fleet, 50% of the workforce, but through various restrictions which are traditional or historical in nature, only 5% of the catch. Catch of the day, several kilos, a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of euro per year. So next slide, please. So what hope is there for blue justice when you have the fishing in general, but the small-scale fleet in particular, which is sandwiched between the European Green Deal, which was launched a few years ago, the blue economy, which is now an integral part of this new Green Deal, and a common fisheries policy, which for decades has proven to be unfair. Next slide, please. So the Green Deal sets very ambitious targets for greenhouse emissions. So that means decarbonization, or moving away from one of the Achilles heels of fishing in general, which is fossil fuels. They talk about decoupling of economic growth from resource use, whatever that means. Offshore energy production. There are huge ambitions for offshore energy productions, 400, 500 gigawatts by 2050. And now we have blue food. Aquaculture is favored as a source of marine food over fisheries as a growth sector. Blue justice, according to the Commission, is all about a fair and just transition to this blue future, which is as yet ill-defined. They talk about an inclusive process, no one left behind. Coupled with that, there's also the post-pandemic lifeline, huge amounts of money which is being allocated to try and keep businesses afloat and moving into the future. And environmental protection as part of the justice. The environment also needs protection. In terms of the common fishing policy, as far as the small-scale sector is concerned, it means unfair access to resources, unfair access to markets, and unfair access to subsidies, which we will come on to. Next slide, please. So just briefly, here is a list of all the lack of equity in the common fishing policy, which has led to a situation with increasing concentration of the ownership of quota in ever fewer hands, lack of protection of the fishing areas for small-scale fishers, lack of support to enterprise development, and we'll hear from someone about the POs, and subsidies going to industrial fishing. Individual companies getting subsidies, so much for the idea that common funds for common use, and market rules and emergency aid which favors industrial fisheries. And in particular, this is why LIFE came on the scene, a lack of a dedicated voice for the small-scale fishers in the decision-making processes, and a lack of influence. Next slide, please. So, the blue economy, or blue fear. So there's diminishing access for fisheries in general. Fisheries are at a crossroads. Increasingly, fisheries are going to have to compete with aquaculture and blue food. And for the moment, in Europe, we're talking about feedlot aquaculture, like these big cages of tuna that you see offshore here, full of fish, which is being fattened using other fish to fatten them. Mass tourism, offshore energy production, maritime transport and infrastructure. The rules are being changed to favor these new interests who are stealing the commons from the goose. The traditional access, which fisheries in general and small-scale fisheries in particular have grown accustomed to, is now being removed. Next slide, please. Fisheries essentially is providing food for European consumers. And in Europe, our food systems are highly centralized, complex, fragile, just in time, with a high carbon footprint and highly wasteful. 1 in 3 fish, at least, that enters the food chain is wasted, is lost. Producers, particularly the small-scale producers, earn a fraction of the end price, 10%. In Europe, we're voracious fish eaters, some of the highest in the world, 28 kilograms per capita per person per year. But frozen fish is preferred to fresh fish, and we consume mainly 5 main species. Over 40% of what we eat comes from salmon, farm salmon from Norway mainly, tuna, shrimp and prawns, cod and Alaska pollock, a lot of which is coming from Russia. 60 to 70% of what we eat comes from imports, so only 30 to 40% is EU production. 25% of what we eat is from aquaculture, but only 10% from European aquaculture. 1.5 of what comes onto our plates is from the EU small-scale fishing sector, which is for every kilogram of fish we eat, 0.01 gram comes from small-scale fisheries. So it's being lost off the map. Next slide, please. Let's look at what's happening with aquaculture. The blue hope. So aquaculture is seen as the growth sector for food production from the sea, not just in Europe, from around the world. This term, blue food, was coined by a recent UN Food System Summit, which was extremely difficult to follow because it never happened in one place at the same time. But a group of experts came up with this term, blue food. We're not sure what it is. It's something to do with aquaculture. Is it analog fish? Is it single-cell protein? Is it seaweed? What is this blue food? In Europe, we can see plainly that aquaculture has been stagnant for the last 20 years. There's been no increases in production, mainly because it's feedlot aquaculture and also it's shellfish farming. There are limits to growth in aquaculture. The European Commission and the industry put this down to lack of access to space. So over the next few years, there's going to be liberalization and deregulation of aquaculture in order to permit aquaculture to expand into marine spaces which previously they weren't able to expand into. This is blue fear. What does this mean for small-scale fisheries? What does this mean for the marine environment? Next slide, please. So the blue fear is raising all kinds of struggles for small-scale fishers. They struggle to obtain the value added. Most of them are still price takers. They have to take what the market offers them. They struggle to obtain fishing quotas because they're being concentrated in the hands of fewer players. They have weak organizations or lack of organizations. They're very individualistic. They don't get any support to form organizations. They struggle to fix fair prices. There's dominance of a few high-value species in the market, which encourages them to fish for those species even harder. They're encouraged to fish illegally because that's the only way to make ends meet. They're encouraged to intensify their fishing effort because that's the only way to catch enough to make the margin. They're encouraged to sell outside the legal framework. This is all contributing to resource overexploitation and undermining the viability of small-scale fisheries. There's a lack of generational renewal, which I alluded to earlier, and small-scale fishers in Europe are at risk of disappearing. Year by year, our fishers are getting older and fewer. So, what can Blue Justice do to revert that? What are we talking about when we talk about Blue Justice? We're talking about equitable access to resources, and hidden cleverly within the CFP is something called Article 17. Now, Article 17, that instead of giving quotas to those who fish the most, i.e. those with the biggest proven track record of catching fish, rather you allocate quotas to those who fish in the most sustainable way, using criteria of a social, economic, and environmental nature. and you provide access to public money for public good. 10 years on, Article 17 is still not being implemented. We want fair access to markets. That means short supply chains, dealing directly with consumers. In many countries, it's illegal for small-scale fishers to sell their fish directly to consumers. They have to sell their fish in the market alongside the landings from the larger scale sector, which have a depressing effect on prices because tons of fish are being landed at a time against the few kilos that are being landed by the small-scale sector. Small-scale fishers also need to forge strategic alliances. That's why we welcome this gathering, where we can talk with academics, we can talk with NGOs, we can talk with policymakers about what needs to be done to ensure that small-scale fisheries have a future and small-scale fisheries can contribute to sustainability of fisheries in Europe. We're going to talk about the low environmental impact of fishing in a plenary session coming up, but it's all about recognizing and rewarding small-scale fishers for doing the job that they're trying to do, which is to land fish with a low carbon footprint, caught in a sustainable way, in a traditional way, putting food on your plate of a high quality. This is not being rewarded, funny though it may seem. We're talking of valuing the traditional ecological knowledge of the fishers, their experiential knowledge. They go to sea every day. They know what's happening there. They see the changes happening. Yet scientists come along and do their sampling, ignore what the fishers are telling them, and go back to their headquarters in Denmark and come up with all kinds of proposals for quotas which make absolutely no sense. We want co-management, we want co-responsibility, we want the traditional ecological and experiential knowledge of fishers valued. And we want to attract youth. Who wants to become a fisherman when all you get is a difficult life, uncertain prospects, getting wet, living dangerously at sea? We want a different image for fishing. We want an image of fishing which is linked far more with what's happening in local communities, with tourism, with a whole different food culture, but also rooted in the traditional cultures that fishing is based on. Coastal communities having access to the sea, providing a service and being recognized. Jerry Percy, who will talk tomorrow, is there. One of the images he used to show was of the postage stamps in the UK. 50 years ago, they showed pictures of fishermen. Fishermen were heroes, catching your fish. Nowadays, all you see on the postage stamps is pictures of fish, endangered species. What happened to the fishermen? What's happening to the fish? Thank you very much.
So now Brice Trouillet from Nantes will explain how French fishermen react towards blue fear.
So hello everybody. I'm very pleased to be part of this session, Imagine Blue Justice. I am Brice Trouillet, full professor of geography at Nantes University, France. And overall, my research deals with the case of fisheries in marine planning in different parts of the world, especially through the informational perspective. So Milena and Katia invited me to talk about small-scale fisheries and offshore wind farms in the French context, and thank you for that. And as you can see, the title of my presentation, The Wind That Shakes the Fishers, and maybe the fishes as well, is inspired by Ken Loach films called The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which is set during the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War. So the context is still very different, but the common point is a story of oppression and a wind of revolt that is looking for a breath. Let me share in 10 minutes some of my thoughts based on my more recent work. In France, despite a certain delay compared to the northern European neighbors, new wind farms are constantly being developed. If the energy sector's target is achieved, this is 2 gigawatts per year until 2028, this corresponds to potential loss of space for fishing of about 300 to 350 kilometers square per year. From a general point of view, this is not a lot, less than 1% of the mainland EEZ in France. But these areas are still very close to the coasts, where SSF is very active. Locally, wind farms can be located in areas that are important for small-scale fishing. And above all, wind farms come on top of increasingly numerous constraints which play importantly on the possibility of displacement of the fishing activity. I think about fuel price, the Brexit issues, other activities like sand extractions, marine protected areas, and so on. Maybe it will come. Ouais, non, mais ça va bien. Okay. So, if we look at the situation in the UK, just 2 minutes, a recent study issued in June put the light on such process over time. Look at how it was in terms of spaces subject to fishing restrictions in 2000. Look at, please, how it is today. So we have 23% of the sea space with restrictions. And how, please, how it would be in 2050. One notices that from the year 2000 to now, the expansion of fishing restriction is patent. The scenario for 2050 suggests that such restrictions for fisheries may double until then in the UK. Even if it would deserve to be studied as finely in the case of France, it seems that the process may be similar there, with numerous marine protected areas with increasing constraints, notably on towed gears, new demand for aggregates extractions, cables, and so on. Please. So, marine spatial planning, MSP in short, is a process that allows to share in a transparent way the space between different needs. But we observed that, at least at this stage, marine planning is not necessarily fair by essence. Please. It rather reflects the expression of power relationships. I will now detail this through 2 dimensions that I have particularly studied: information and participation issues. Please. Firstly, regarding the informational issues. Far from being specific, marine planning processes show there are informational justice issues at each stage of the information life cycle. No, oh yes. Yeah, to be clear, or as a reminder, no, yeah. Yeah, as a reminder, data in their simplest form are just alphanumeric values. Okay, this is. Thank you. Information is created when data are processed, organized, or structured to provide context and meaning. So information is essentially processed data, and knowledge is simply what we know. So, on this basis, regarding data collections, some questions raise issues of justice, such as the absence of data, notably for small-scale fisheries, that are out of the monitoring system classically, or the question of non-qualification of certain data or certain knowledges, or the question of who designed the collection process, and so on. Next, please. Yeah. Regarding data processing, some questions also raise issue of justice, such as the technical choices in terms of processing, just like the speed threshold, for instance, mapping choices, and Svein reminds us that another word when it comes to planning for image is just map. Okay, so you can do what you want with a map, and you can tell what you want with a map. So we have to pay a lot of attention on that. Next, please. And this is the same for data circulation, which issues such as accessibility of data, interoperability, storage, the costs of the data, and so on. Next, please. And finally, when it comes to data use or information use, the challenges are multiple, such as the non-fit-for-purpose data, and this is notably the case in Europe, where we have to use the best scientific knowledge for marine planning, but the best scientific knowledge is not necessarily a good knowledge for fisheries in marine planning, so we should pay attention to that. This is also the question of the metric used, the wording as well, and information misuse. So these are all very important informational issues related to marine planning and to fisheries in marine planning. Please. As a result, small-scale fisheries are absent from marine planning outcomes. Because marine planning privileges the bioeconomic data that already exists for fisheries management, those which neglect SSF or reduce its scope. It is necessary to be more attentive to these technical aspects, which can cover strong political stakes and engage a question of justice, especially for small-scale fisheries. Next, please. Regarding now, secondly, the participation issues. The ability of actors to participate is a matter of power, as well as the kind of lever they have in hands. Based on analyses carried out in France, we have settled that, first, the contribution to the debates are very technical, proving that the professional actors of fisheries are very present, and the professional actor in general, to the detriment of the wider public. In other words, MSP is a word of happy few. Here, the risk for the fishery representatives is to be disconnected from simple fishers and to make simplistic statements about fisheries. Next, please. Second, among these professional actors, fishers seem very active and even influential in the discussions. So, when it comes to the game, fishers are strong players. This is the case in France. Thus, the risk is not to be able to keep cohesion considering the diversified interest of fishers according to the type of fisheries, different techniques, and so on. Next, please. Third, that being said, fishers and representatives did not participate in setting the rule of the game and are subject to these rules today. While the major energy players have largely oriented technical choices upstream the planning process. In particular, the choice of a very special and very prescriptive dimension of marine planning in France is an evidence of that. These non-explicit choices are also convergent with those of other public policies, in particular marine protected areas, without this being debated. Next, please. So, thank you for listening, and don't forget that from fisheries to fish heroes, only one letter is different. Thanks.
So, Arne, do you want to come here or you speak from there? Arne will speak about the French cooperatives in small-scale fisheries cooperatives in Normandy.
Good morning. My name is Arne Kins from the Equal Sea Lab at the University of Santiago de Compostela. I will be presenting today a study that we're preparing with a couple of colleagues called Reclaiming Blue Space. Can producer cooperatives and innovative financing schemes transform artisanal fisheries? Perspectives from France. So let's first consider this classification of fisheries management made by Jean Boncoeur in 2006. It classifies fisheries management as being composed of two branches. On the left, you see conservation measures. On the right, you see access regulation. So conservation measures, they govern how much fish can be taken from the sea, can be removed from the sea, at what sizes, with which gears, etc. And on the right, the access regulation will define who can fish and who not, and how much each of these participants can take. So taking only fisheries management into account, we can say that blue space for artisanal fishers is defined by these questions. Who can fish, where can they fish, how much, and when? But in reality, the process of marine spatial planning will further restrict the blue space available to artisanal fishers, as a couple of speakers today also have invoked. So for example, marine spatial planning, wind and wave energy, marine aquaculture will compete for space with artisanal fishermen. So if we take another perspective, a bit broader than that, more than fisheries management, Jan Kooijmans' framework places institutions of fisheries management at the second order of governance. These institutions are then influenced by the meta-order of governance, so in other words, by the values and the beliefs of the system in which they are embedded. So, as such, fisheries are influenced by a logic of capitalism, neoliberalism, economic rationalization, market-based fisheries management, and conservation policies. So it's this hegemony, this status quo, that contributes to the marginalization of small-scale fisheries, and why they are often depicted as being old school, inefficient. And if we think of blue space in this context, it's this logic that influences largely how small-scale fisheries are perceived and how they are organized. So testimony of this, I would say, is an entire body of literature, coining terms such as winners and losers, accumulation by dispossession, ocean grabbing, or scale up or leave. So there's a whole body of literature that actually supports this position. So space can be considered both the physical space and the institutional space, which presents opportunities and barriers, also limitations for small-scale fishers and their representatives. So let's now take a look at how French fisheries management has shaped the artisanal fishing sector. I would like to first define artisanal fisheries. I tend to mix up small-scale fisheries and artisanal fisheries a lot in this presentation, but actually there's a very context-specific definition of artisanal fisheries in the context of France. So it's a model that's based on one vessel, one operator, vessels smaller than 25 meters, often smaller than that. The entrepreneur is the embarked owner who invests their own capital in the fishing business, which is often a very simple structure, a sole proprietorship. And then there's other elements that are being invoked to contrast artisanal fisheries or small-scale fisheries with industrial fisheries. The versatility of fishing activity, short fishing trips, small crew, high family involvement, strong local anchoring. So in the 1980s, the fleet development in France was heavily subsidized, and there were supporting structures supported by the state, which were fishing cooperatives. And at the peak of their existence, there were about 20 structures in the 1980s. And then in the fishing crisis of the 1990s, and after that, the end of subsidies in the 2000s, there was a heavy decline of fishing vessels in the artisanal fleet. So what happens is that the freed up capacity was being bought up by the remaining fishers. And what's important, I think, to note about the French fisheries management is that there is officially, it is not allowed, there's no transferability of fishing opportunities. But there's a de facto quota market through the second-hand vessel market. So fishermen can obtain extra fishing opportunities by buying an extra fishing vessel. It's a way around the system, you could say. So this resulted in high vessel prices and an access barrier for mainly new entrants, young skippers, and small-scale fishers. So we have described the French fisheries management system and how it affects small-scale fishers in a book chapter for the TBTA book on Blue Justice. And without going into detail, I think it's important to explain how fishing opportunities are allocated to fishers. So in theory, there's 3 criteria: vessel track records, market considerations, and socio-economic considerations. But in practice, most allocations happen based on track records alone. And these track records, they represent the landings of the fishing vessel in a reference period between 2001 and 2003. So what happens is that we have a problem with the screen here. So what happens is that fishers, they don't necessarily get the quota they bring in, but the general rule is the more they bring in, the higher their chances are that they get the quota that they need. So fishers perceive the system as unfair because not all fishers have track records. Access is expensive to buy a vessel, to make it fit for fishing. There's little participation in decision-making. And because of this, the fisheries management implemented a couple of mitigating measures, such as track records that would be redistributed to the small-scale fishermen. But up until today, this hasn't happened. So in this context, fishers and their representatives are actually devising new ways of dealing with this context. So the first order responses of these organizations and these fishermen are to integrate value chains as an individualistic approach, or to rebuild these old cooperatives in a modern way. Sorry, the text was not appearing. I think the screen is off. It would be nice if you could turn it back on. Okay, thanks. I hope this will still work though. So, what are these mechanisms for obtaining and securing fishing opportunities? The way of obtaining fishing opportunities would be to trade vessels on the second-hand market. So we see these 2 fishers on the left. If fisher 1 wants to buy out fisher 2, he buys their fishing vessel. There's a transaction on the second-hand market, and when there's a transfer, there's a 20% preemption of track records that flow into these reserves that were supposed to help young fishers establish themselves. Then a way of securing fishing opportunities is by creating limited liability companies. So we have first looked at the situation on the left. On the left, where the vessel producer partnership is a sole proprietorship. In this case, the track records, they belong to the vessel producer partnership. When the vessel changes owner, there's a 20% preemption of track records. If the owner of the fishing vessel has constructed a limited liability company, then the limited liability company is the operator of the fishing vessel, and when it changes hands, the track records stay intact. So there's no preemption there. So by structuring the fishing enterprise, he or she is protected from this rule. Sorry. Okay. So structuring a fishing business like this is not something any fisher can do. It requires time and money and often also help from lawyers or from business administration centers, and generally a strong entrepreneurial attitude, which not all fishers have. So I want to recall also the scale up or leave rhetoric, which also has affected many artisanal fishermen. So these so-called artisanal operators, now we see them buying up vessels of their peers, and they sometimes build impressive fishing companies with up to 10 vessels or more. In the remainder of this presentation, I would like to focus not on these individualistic approaches, but on the collective governance through cooperatives. Thank you. So on the right, you see a map of France, and we have conducted interviews in 2019, 2020, and we have there identified 3 structures independently of each other that were building or rebuilding these cooperatives like they existed before, but in a different way. So we call them now new cooperative structures, just to make the difference. So the context in which these cooperative firms were established is very similar in all 3 cases. There's an observation that fishing capital is disappearing from the port. There's a difficulty finding crew. There's direct competition with large-scale fishing companies, and a direct competition for resources and also for fishing capital. And I would like to show this situation because the impact of these transactions between individuals sometimes have a big impact on the entire system. So if you consider this fisherman on the left selling a vessel to a fisherman with already 2 vessels in his fleet in Saint-Malo, there's actually a redistribution of these track records between regions. So what happens is that the allocation, the share of the national quota pool that the state delegates to the producer organization, it has a negative feedback loop on that because they lose these track records. This producer organization loses this portion. And evidently, the other producer organization of which this other fisher is a member of will gain this. So there is a redistribution regionally. So what do these models have in common, these 3 cooperative models? The driving force in all 3 of them is a small-scale PO. Skippers, they can progressively acquire ownership of a vessel. They start at 10, 20, 30%, and after a couple of years, they are able to buy more shares. And the risk, most of the risk is borne by the cooperative structure. So for the fishermen, it's an advantage in that sense as well. What's new about this way of working is that they use a value chain approach. So the structure is funded, is backed by financial institutions, but also local investors such as net makers, fishmongers, mechanics, etc. And there's a central role for the PO. They have access to information and they also oversee the organization of production. I've taken a couple of quotes just to support this narrative. The first one is, we want to compete with private investors. The focus is on buying quota and to use the quota fully. If we buy a vessel, it's our aim to earn the equivalent in revenue. This way we become financially stronger to reinvest. The second is, our vision is over a period of 7 to 8 years to renew the entire fleet. We identify vessels that represent an important proportion of production and install young skippers on those operations. The third one, we bought a vessel with quota, but in good shape. Without quota, sorry, but in good shape. There was unexpected quota in the English Channel, which I knew of only because I am the director of the PO. So there's potentially a conflict of interest, but it's an interesting situation in which the small-scale producer organization has information that other people don't have. This helps them a lot. So the objective of these structures is to bring back vessels and employment to the port, with a focus on vessels with track records attached, to revitalize the local economy across the value chain, and to provide stable opportunities for young skippers. The ownership structure can be summarized as follows. The vessel is held by the limited liability company, which is registered as the operator of the vessel. And this limited liability company is co-owned by the cooperative structure and by the skipper. So you have to see, like, there's as many limited liability companies as there are vessels in this structure. So the majority owner is the cooperative structure, and the financing of this structure comes from the value chain, like I said before. So skippers can be owner until 49.9%. This is just one example. They all have a bit of a different way of doing this. We never want to be minority shareholders. The next step is immediately 100%. We might lose grip as minority shareholders and we risk losing fishing rights. For the skipper, the option stays open to keep 20-30% and to stay on payroll. And just as a side note, I would like to mention that this model in itself is not new. And we see also that more and more large-scale fishing companies, industrial fishing companies are using this approach. So instead of the cooperative structure, you would have a private large-scale fishing firm that seeks to capture some of the rents of small-scale fishing without actually fishing, so just through investment. And that's an evolution that also I think we should follow up. So the conclusion, I think, is these are promising new initiatives, but only time and study will tell if they are really successful. They were very new in 2019, 2020, and since then we haven't been able to follow up. So further research is needed to their internal governance and resilience, their fleet performance, and their socio-economic benefits. To conclude, I think that these hybrid cooperatives are a pragmatic response to inequality in the French fishing sector, but they do hardly challenge the status quo. So it's a way of moving within the system and using the tools that are often used against them, so the market mechanisms used against them, to have an answer, to establish themselves, and to have a more secure future. So I think yet cooperatives have a great potential to secure artisanal fishing interest in France and elsewhere. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for all the speakers and the great presentations. We will open now the floor for discussion. I'm not sure if Ratana is hearing us and if she has questions from the people who are joining us online.
I am here, but we don't have any questions yet, so
Okay.
I'll be monitoring that and let you know. Thank you.
Okay, so I have some questions, but I can leave that to you first. No questions for the moment? Okay, then I'll start with some. Oh, sorry, there was one. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us? Thank you.
Yes, I am. Hi, Sofia Kochalski from the University of Santiago de Compostela. The presentations fitted really nicely together. And I was just wondering, so Svein talked about the importance of images, and then we heard about the new, for me, new concept of blue fear. And I was wondering if this is again like a bit of a scary picture. And yeah, I was wondering if like Svein could comment on the blue fear, or if Brian could comment on how he sees his images or terms, and yeah, how these work together.
Blue fear, yeah, like blue justice, it's a way of capitalizing in simple language something that is happening out there. It may give us different ideas or images in our mind, but it certainly encourages us to go into the real world and find out what this involves, what kind of experience that is, and how it is conceptualized by those who are experiencing this and what they're doing with it, and how they may succeed in. I'm for these new words like blue fear and blue justice, because the blue economy, just the very concept, blue growth, are such powerful concepts, and they leave an image in our mind that everything is going to be fine, we will all be prosperous, there will be no losers, there are only winners in the end. And that is the kind of image we need to challenge by phrasing alternative images. And these concepts like blue fear and blue justice are doing exactly that. So therefore we can have a sort of a balanced debate where we share a language that we cannot, once we have the concept, cannot ignore them. So I think it's wonderful. Blue fear, I have never heard that before now, and I think I'm going to use it more in the future, because it's referring to something real that is out there, but it is for us as researchers to go out and understand where it comes from and what it involves and what consequences it has for people's lives and communities.
Thank you, Sven. Yeah. I had in my presentation that I explained that blue justice was coined during the third World Small-Scale Fisheries Congress. So maybe this is an opportunity to coin another word. In every Congress we have more concepts that help to understand what's happening with small-scale fisheries. So if you like blue fear, maybe we can start voting for it. But if you have other ideas of concepts that explain what is happening with these fisheries in Europe, please do not hesitate to say it here, and we can discuss it and see if we are lucky. I don't think it's lucky if we will put efforts to bring this concept to the audiences and to other spheres, like it was in the case of blue justice. That is not us that is talking about us. Blue justice is out there, and there's even in some high policy documents. So, yeah, there's some hope.
But I think Brian has, because he mentioned this concept, so Brian has an
course.
explanation.
You want to patent it, or?
I think it's okay.
It's working. Can you hear me? I need to get close to it.
Yeah.
Blue fear is not a concept. Blue fear is not something imagined. Blue fear is reality. It comes down to what Bryce was saying. The world of marine spatial planning is the world of a happy few, disconnected from the fishers. Blue fear I first heard articulated in Lisbon at the end of June by someone representing the Confederation of Professional African Fishermen, an African representative from Gambia, who got up and said, "What is the blue economy? No one has defined it. We don't know what it is. We call it the blue fear because we know it's out there, but we don't know how it's going to affect us, and it will affect us." So, two things. One is the right and the importance of the small-scale fishers to be there at the decision-making table. They need financial support, they need capacity building to be able to articulate what's on their minds, but they also need the space to be able to make their claims, to be able to put on the table what they consider to be a just blue economy. So those two things aren't happening at the moment. I mean, here today we have representatives of small-scale fishers from about 6 countries, from Poland, you want to stand up at the back? Representing small-scale fishers?
La petite pêche?
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, a small proportion who are here today. So there were 20 representatives in Lisbon from 4 continents amongst 6,000 delegates who were basically arguing the toss between conservation, 30 by 30 by 30, generating $30 billion to make 30% of the sea marine protected areas by 2030, and those who are saying, no, open up the oceans to new investment. No one was talking about fishing because fishing now has moved off the agenda. What we have on the agenda is blue food. Nobody knows what that is. So it's the unknown, it's tangible, and we live in a changing world and a brave new world in the future, which is as yet undefined. We're moving into new territory. Fisheries are at a crossroads.
Thank you. Brice has a comment.
Yeah, a very quick comment, just to let you know that in France we have an expression which is avoir une peur bleue, to have blue fear. And the reason is a medical one, because when you have less oxygen in your blood, we talk about avoir une peur bleue, to have a blue fear. Anyway, regarding the blue fear you are mentioned, I think that the whole adage, when you are not at the table, this is because you are on the menu. I think is the main reason why there is blue fear at this moment, because most of the time fishers and fishers representatives are not at the table, so probably they are on the menu.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question from the audience. Pradeep.
Hello, my name is Pradeep Naik from the University of Waterloo and Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership. Thank you very much for the thoughtful, remarks by the panelists. I have a twofold question here. So, imagining blue justice, the way we hear the reflections from the panels, it looks like you can only be able to imagine things about blue justice if you are able to imagine things related to blue justice, all the drivers, all the pressures, and everything else that influences blue justice. So in order to be able to effectively and creatively imagine things about blue justice, we first need to be able to imagine things in the associated fields. So I would like to hear a little bit more from the panelists on that aspect. And the second aspect is the ways of imagining, being an academic, what is the methodological challenges in engaging in imagining creatively about not only blue justice, but also everything that matters for small-scale fisheries. So what are some of the ways available for imagining as an individual fisher, imagining as a community enabler, imagining as a theory builder, or imagining together? These are different ways of imagining. So a bit more reflection would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Two very interesting questions. The first one, can we do a bit more than just telling what are the problems, but can we imagine not the solutions, but ways to get there? And the second question is, what are the tools and the methodologies that we have to study these images as researchers? Any? Of the panelists, anyone wants to start?
Well, I think many of the answers to this question have been out there for a very, very long time. I mentioned the need to unite, the need to organize, and that has been an argument that has been out there for a long time. We know that it's a challenging idea in fisheries, but it is doable, and I think it's necessary. If fishers are going to sit around the table, how do we know that they will, if they were scared to begin with, how do we know that they will not end up being even more scared when they hear what the other people have in mind? So only if they have that power behind them, only if they can speak on behalf of many, only when they have the knowledge to actually represent their people at the decision-making table with knowledge and competency, that is, they can effectively participate. But I still also think it is important that we don't end up in a situation where. I was once in a regional fisheries management council in the U.S., and I was impressed by the way the fishermen spoke. And they were so eloquent, and they knew the law in detail. and they were effective in discussing fairly competent or complicated legal matters. But then I noticed that it was not the fishermen who were speaking, but it was their lawyers. And to me, that seems like a form of representation that I'm not sure if it is empowerment that we can talk about, but I think we are confronting real challenges that we have to think through when we argue that fishers should be around the table. In what capacity and with what competency and what power is issues that need to be addressed. You can't just place them around the table and expect that magic will happen.
Thank you, Svein.
Because they are confronting actors that have all the legal competency representing them and the economic muscle.
Brian?
Thank you. There's all the empowerment issues that Sven is mentioning, which relate to having some kind of affirmative action projects, which bring the small-scale fishers to the center as actors of change in their own right. Generally, small-scale fishers are seen as the objects of change. Change is happening to them rather than them being at the center saying what the changes they want. So that is a whole process, and I think probably best encapsulated in SDG 14b, access to resources and markets for artisanal fisheries. It sounds very simple, but that needs to be unpacked. From the market end, here in Europe, we're consumers. Our food security depends on our purchasing power, not on what's on the market. There's loads of stuff on the market, but most people simply can't afford it or don't know about it, unable to use it. So that means, as I showed in my slide, that the contribution of small-scale fishers to our food system is marginal, very, very small. That is changing. We have food champions in the form of Michelin chefs, in terms of organizations like Slow Food, who are developing this very much, eat local, eat sustainable, build a model of the market with consumers and producers and consumers around a fair price. But the fishermen will disappear, the fishermen, the fisherwomen, the whole supply chain will disappear if at the end of the day, the fishers don't get the value added and make a profit. That is the bottom line. But that ain't going to happen with the kind of fish market we have in Europe, which is so centralized and so dependent on people eating what they're more or less being told to eat. It's cheap, it's healthy, it's sustainable. Yeah, we have the MSC, we have all these labels for farm salmon, which we know are not sustainable. We know the MSC is not sustainable because resource after resource suddenly becomes on the endangered list, and the MSC has already certified it as being sustainable. So, yeah, it has to get down to the local level. What is sustainable, what is acceptable, what people eat has to be a dialogue between fishers and consumers. That's where I think the action needs to be.
Thank you very much. I will just, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Milena. Just a very quick word to further the two previous answers. I think that in general, we can ask, are public powers willing to solve the problem?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
How do powers?
Yeah.
Power is a tricky word because but we cannot avoid power. Power has been here with us since before we had problems with. So we have to accept that there is power, but we have to balance this power. And one important bit is accepting that there's other images, accepting that people imagine things differently. My answer to you, Pratip, will be that people have already these images. We don't have to be creative. Like the case that Arne was showing, there is innovations. Fishermen are innovators. They are all the time trying to find other ways. They have a lot of creativity, and they know, at least in Sweden, they know what they want. It's just that the image of what should be the future clash with the images of the managers. They want to go, the images are very much in the past. We want to come back what we had. We had the power and we were the bonds of fishing communities. That's what they image how things should go to. But they are struggling with quotas, with access and all the things that do not allow them to be the bonds of fishing communities. So there's this power of images as well. Some are dominant and some are not. Some are just forgotten, neglected, and ignored. So they are there, in my opinion. Arne?
I would like to, is this on? Aria. I'd like to add something to that, maybe, is that an image is still only an image, and an image can only exist or grow within the boundaries of the system. I think when talking about the tools and the frameworks for blue justice, I think there's alternative political and economic theories that exist. And for me, I think it's important to imagine a future that goes beyond fisheries and beyond like a different, we see that many things in the world are failing, and we have to conceive of a different world in ideas. And then I think there's a way of practice will build to that world. So I think an image is not enough. I think there's practice needed to get to an image that we collectively aspire to.
Yeah. Yes, there's a question from the table. Cornelia, please.
Hello?
Check.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to continue in that train of thought, and instead of thinking in terms of how we fight over a diminishing cake, I would like to think of how we increase the cake so that there is more for small-scale fishers and others, and there is more room for justice. Because obviously, when you are fighting over the last piece of bread or something, it's just very bad. But we know from assessments of European waters, and I'm not even talking about the rest of the world, but that we could have 50% more production in European waters if with the implied savings in energy and all kinds of other things, of labor, of effort, of capital investment, if we were leaving young fish to grow to adult size and increase the number of fish that can reproduce in the water. We have, the populations are so low that with any stretch of imagination, they cannot produce more than they do. But nature is normally very generous. You can have 20% interest rate if you have big capital, but we have been consuming the capital rather than living off interest. And I think the small-scale fishers could be, let's say, the spearheading a movement where we protect the resources better and therefore make the allocation much easier to them, especially because there is so much space competition now, which is bound to increase. Now, how can we create or turn some of these challenges into opportunities for rebuilding the stocks, but in a way that the cost and the benefits are fairly shared? I think that is really the linchpin of it to be acceptable and fair. So sharing the cost and the benefit equitably. And I think there is plenty of, I think small-scale fishers can easily, let's say, replace even the industrial fleets and have good lives and produce much higher quality food than you will ever get out of an industrial fishery. So I would like us perhaps to reflect a bit together, what are the opportunities to increase the cake so that everybody has a better living? Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia. Sorry. Oh, another question.
My name is Matteo Scarponi. I'm a naval architect and a small vessel stability consultant in the Wolfsau unit, which is a small enterprise outfit in Southampton, England. If I may contribute a very well-known example of blue injustice and blue fear, this one my UK colleagues might be familiar with. 2020 was the worst year in a decade in terms of lives lost at sea in the fishing sector, with 10 fishermen lost their lives when doing their job. And this happened, and this was the worst year in a decade. And this happens after a long, a very scattered trend in the casualty data in the UK, where we went from not many casualties to 10 or more casualties, depending on how harsh the winter was up north. So as a result, in September 2021, a new code of practice for under 15-meter vessels, fishing vessels, came into force, and this meant that small-scale fishing fleet, which is in the UK is the under 15-meter overall length, instantly became regulated. So most vessels, 90% of the fishing fleet is under 15 meters. Most of those vessels were so old to be unregulated, so not built against any safety standards, primarily stability standards. So overnight, they had to meet some very strict stability standards and safety standards in general, so fire safety, man overboard arrangements, and such on and such like. So this, there's a 5-year transitional period in the new code of practice. There's no transition for stability requirements. So a fishing vessel that doesn't comply is basically out of business. And this happened overnight, between the 6th and the 7th of September last year. So this has been bad enough to put many small-scale fishing vessel owners out of business or on suicide watch. And there's a partial solution to this matter, which again, as it's been highlighted so far, lives with negotiation and co-management of fisheries between the policymakers, in this case, the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, and fishing vessel owners, skippers, and fisheries representatives. And if you need to know more about the partial solution to this problem, you can attend my presentation this afternoon, if you like. At session 1.2, chaired by Milena.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Many thanks. Do we have more questions from the audience? There's one question from Sebastian, and here as well.
So I'm Marco Stantini, WWF International Mediterranean Marine Initiative. I would like to add a comment on increasing the cake. And this is connected to also to the concept of blue fear. Fear is always connected with something that we don't know. When we have fear of something, we don't know what is taking place, what is going on. So first, as scientists, our NGOs and others, we should invest our time to explain what's the situation. And we have the role to understand what is the blue economy. Honestly, I have some fear too. I'm not able to understand what is blue economy in its essence. So with respect to the academia should work in order to understand the impact and calculate the impact and understand the impact on small-scale fishery, but vice versa. And this is about increasing the cake. I know better the Mediterranean context than the rest of the European context, but all the stock assessed by the European Union and the General Fishery Commission for the Mediterranean are stocks targeted by industrial fishers, not by the small-scale fishers. So if we want to increase the cake, we need to assess also the stocks targeted by the small-scale fishers and understand their impact. Because we are giving as an assumption the fact that small-scale fishers are sustainable, and I do believe that. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data about that, in particular in a context where the biodiversity is extremely high, as in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So if we want to reduce fear that all of us are sharing, we need to increase the knowledge, because knowledge is power. To go back and close to the...
Yes, thank you very much. Sebastian, great comment, in my opinion.
Okay, does it work now? Thank you. Sebastian Linke from the University of Gothenburg. I liked very much the discussion that emerged here about sort of speak. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for the nice talks and a very inspiring sort of problematization, what to do with these images. It was nice to see the pyramids and roses again from Svein. I've seen that almost for 10 years. As you said, a lot of the questions and maybe also a lot of the answers are already out there for a long time. And when I prepared for this conference, I thought a lot about this. Okay, I'm going to Malta, imagining the unimaginable a bit, but so what? I think that discussion emerged a bit now here, and it's, to me, very important. I don't want to sort of go home from Malta just having imagined a bit the unimaginable, and then I would like to learn something about what to do differently, about alternative approaches to governance from these images and so on. And I think there's a lot of capacity here, and I hope that this is will be inspiring days to do that. And for example, what Arne mentioned, the role of subsidies or decreased subsidies, I think that's an interesting box that will also be opened in some of the sessions I saw. What the very term or image maybe also of subsidies means in definition. Or when we talk about support through the EU, EMFF or MFF now, I think that's sort of very interesting to the political dimensions of what we talk about when we talk about support, subsidies and all that within this, the neoliberal free market economy that many people take for granted, and many of the social scientists among us sort of are criticizing. But how can we go beyond that? That's something that I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. And I just realized, I quoted a sentence from the paper that Jeremy and Brian wrote in this small-scale fisheries book, which I think nicely captures that. It's not just representing small-scale fisheries and providing fishers with a voice, but to promote an alternative and more responsible approach to fisheries based on the 3 pillars of sustainability. So I thought that was a nice capturing of the things I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I have one comment or question vielleicht to Brice, and it's directed also to this discussion about knowledge is power. You talk about informational injustice. And my question is there the injustice coming from, in your opinion, the way we are doing? There is knowledge about small-scale fisheries, or at least it has increased a lot. We have shown all these books. There is some knowledge there. It's the kind of knowledge that it's more qualitative than quantitative. Are we doing this wrong, or it's a problem of science policy gap? So whatever we know, it won't be taken by policymakers because they need to get their own data, and only when they have produced their data, they use it.
Yeah, thank you for this question. When I started to study the question of information in the fisheries management and marine planning years ago now, I read a very interesting book from Arun Agrawal, a politician in the University of Chicago, and I learned something very interesting in that. It is about the valorization of in situ valorization of knowledge. And this changed totally the way I perceived the question of knowledge in such questions. The very simple idea is that classically, the scientists are going to the ground, are capturing the knowledge, and then they valorize the knowledge of the holders in their laboratory. And the idea was to shift to the position, shift the position of the scientist in order that the scientist is accompanying the holders of the knowledge to make him or her able to valorize himself or herself, his or her knowledge. So it totally changed the things, because when you are able to use yourself, your knowledge, you are able to understand how you collected, how you processed the information, how you can represent or not the information, how and when and why you should use the information at this moment, or rather at this different moment. So I think this idea is very important, because beyond the knowledge in itself, the question is, what can you do with your knowledge? Yes. Okay, what can you do with this? Or what could you imagine you are able to do with the knowledge you have? So maybe it's a first answer for this.
Thank you very much, but also a reflection. I like very much that question. What can you do with our knowledge about small-scale fisheries that we have been collected through now years and decades? Svein has a maybe last comment.
I think it was David Hume who said that knowledge is power, and there is some truth to that, of course. But the opposite is also true, which is basically what Brice is arguing. You know, if you have power, you have the knowledge, you have the power to determine what counts as knowledge in, for instance, in marine spatial planning. And then we are into Foucault and what he thought about power and knowledge. And I think that is true. You know, power is of course, the fear comes from the fact that you do not have power. It's not just a lack of information, but you do not have the power to protect yourself in a situation where knowledge counts. And then we're back to the issue of organization and this stuff. So this is a complex kind of a complex issue, and the causal errors goes in both ways.
Thank you very much. I will ask Ratana if she wants to wrap up, or if she has questions from the...
Thank you, Milena. There is no question from the virtual participants at this time, but we don't have more time anyway. So let me just thank the speakers and also the chairs of the session, Milena and Katia. We are just starting the conversation here, right? It's just the first session, so we would be doing more of these. So let's take a lunch break. You actually have just 1 hour, so please come back to the session at 1 o'clock. Let's thank all the speakers and
thank you.
Everybody again. So please be back at 1 p.m. to participate.
See you later. Thank you.